Wednesday, everybody. I hope you are staying safe in the storms that have been all over the US. What a storm season. We have two airings of this today. They'll be 12 o'clock and 8 o'clock. So if you miss any of this or you want to watch it again, you can go back and watch that at 8 o'clock or catch this on any of our avenues after this post. We have our huge summer bash, the reschedule from our weather canceled event from spring. This will be on the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th. The mixer on the 15th is at our personal home. We would love to see you there. If that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to the team. We've got an incredible summer webinar series. I definitely encourage you to register for all of these. We put a lot of time and effort into asking other clients what the things they wanted to hear about the most were, and come up with the things that are going to really help you propel yourself forward in your investment journey. All of the registration links are live. You can use this QR code here to register. And of course, most of those will be posted after the fact. We're also going to do a Q&A webinar. We've never done one of these before. We'll set the date in the next couple of weeks, but essentially you'll be able to come in or pre-ask any question you want, and I will answer that live for you and go into those topics. Again, you can catch any of those webinars on the backside through our channels, or of course you can join our mailing list to stay up to date on upcoming webinars and all the things that we are doing. We've got a ton of upcoming property tour dates. We're going to have a tour the big weekend, June 14th, June 21st, and then 2 per month moving forward. The one in yellow in September is a weekend tour, but of course we do private tours throughout the month as well. As always, everything I'm going to talk about today is based on my best guess and years of experience as someone who operates as a real estate investor and also the owner of a real estate investment and property management firm. We are one tool in your toolbox. My goal is to connect you with the information and the people who can better help you on your real estate journey. But I'm not a CPA, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not someone who can give you that piece of information. However, I'm going to tell you the questions that I think you need to ask and teach you the model that we believe is the best out there. Short-term rentals are something that I have had as a part of my portfolio for almost a decade. They are something that you can use as a tool and certainly something that has a lot of potential. However, there's also a lot of negative risk with short-term rentals, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to teach this class today. For those of you who don't know me, Michael and I own about a $44 million real estate portfolio. We own multiple businesses. We've been speaking around the U.S. since I was 18, he was 19, born and raised in DFW, and we really do a unique approach to real estate investing that's very active, a lot of very fast-moving pieces to build wealth and build a portfolio as quickly as possible. We're going to talk about the good of short-term rentals, the benefits and the best practices, the bad, which are the common problems when you own and manage short-term rentals, and then the ugly, the amount of work that it takes to make these succeed. But first, let's start with what is a short-term rental. A short-term rental is something that is a property that is rented out for either a few days or a few weeks. So this can be a single family, this can be a condo, this can be a piece of land. So it's any property that is rented out for a short duration of time. That can be used for vacation stays, business trips, or temporary housing. They typically are going to be fully furnished, and sometimes they're going to have assorted amenities. And when we say fully furnished, we're talking dishes, plates, blankets, linens, everything that you could possibly think of to make a home successful and something that someone could occupy. Typically, these are going to be the rentals that you'll see on places like Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, Travelocity, Expedia. And there's a lot of pros and cons to short-term rentals. We have flexibility, we have high income potential, and emphasis on that word potential. We'll talk about that later. And a way to diversify your portfolio, not only in terms of location, but property type. The negatives are extremely high maintenance, heavy regulations and bans in certain areas, and this is only getting worse. Neighbors dislike them and can cause a problem. Damages from tenants because you have so many tenants turning over. It's often in volatile markets or bubble markets, and if you're going to have a property manager, the fees are incredibly expensive. We're going to go into depth in all of these and more later on. So a quick little note on short-term rentals. You may have noticed I've labeled more negatives than positives. And the reason why is because they're not for the faint of heart. They do have a bit more risk. And they can be lucrative, but they're a lot of hard work, and they're not something you can have quietly on the side. This is not a passive income approach if you want to make money. The people I know who have them as passive income approaches with the property manager who don't monitor and manage and are actively involved do not even cover their expenses. A lot of people think you can make a ton of money in short terms, and you can. But if you have a property manager and you're not being extremely aggressive and you're not on top of it, generally you cannot. You can maybe cover your mortgage at best. So compared to our normal investment strategy recommendations, which of course is our single family new construction properties, this is going to be a bigger time commitment. You're going to have equal or greater cash flow and of course more volatility. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on to the good. So, short-term rentals often command higher nightly rates compared to long-term leases. For example, a property that might bring in $3,000 a month on a long-term rental might have a nightly price of more than $200 per day. So, the more nights that you rent it out in a month, you can make more money, and that's where the big income potential really comes in. However, that growth is dictated by your occupancy rate, which can be troublesome, especially in certain markets. So, you can maximize your returns by taking advantage of what we call peak pricing. And that involves raising prices during the good season, the holidays, and local events. Generally, that's going to be holidays and summer. Like most aspects of short term rentals, by raising and lowering the prices based on what we call this peak pricing, it does take a lot of work and, of course, monitoring trends and staying ahead of the competition. For where I have my short term rentals, I even take a look at what events are going on in the area. That way, I know what weekends are going to be the most desirable. The Blue Angels actually practice right in front of the area where I have my short term rentals. And so the weeks where they're going to be there, I know that commands a lot more rent. Now, the booking companies can do a lot of that for you, but of course, they're going to take a chunk of your revenue. For example, on VRBO, they have something called Market Maker, and it's actually going to tell you where they recommend you raise and lower prices based on demand and availability of similar or comparable properties. One of the greatest strengths of short terms is the flexibility in how you can use the property. But that flexibility is only going to last as long as your property was purchased somewhere that doesn't have these strict local and state ordinances or laws on short term rentals. One of the best parts about owning short-term rentals, it's a vacation rental, is you get to stay there. And that's actually what got me started. It was a way to diversify, but also a way to own a beach house when the area I like to go to is about $20,000 a week. So whether that's somewhere that's beautiful in a big mansion, or whether it's in the mountains, whether it's at the beach, this gives you flexibility to have a vacation rental in the place or places that are your favorite to travel. However, the more nights you stay, you need to remember the more you're cutting into your revenue, especially if you were going during peak season. Now, one benefit is you can also be flexible with your pricing based on the demand. And if you're not happy with the returns, you can also flex your short term into other options, especially if you don't have a very expensive property where a long term lease might be an option, like in the middle of the city. So you could flex it into a long term lease, a mid-term rental, or just sell in 1031 into an entirely new investment. The market's pretty kind to short-term rentals right now. Numbers are down from the peak of COVID. Of course, that's obvious. A lot of people thought that COVID's numbers were going to continue, but market dynamics would tell you that people weren't going to hotels because they were dense and the risk factors associated with COVID. And so short-term rentals did a huge boost there. However, a lot of people are still choosing to do short-term rentals, and they have about 15% of the market share right now, which is double the 7% it had in 2018. And Airbnb has more stays aggregated than any other individual hotel chain. So it's a big, big market. That's not changing. You just need to be sure when you're looking at income numbers, you're not looking during COVID. But this does mean you have a lot of competition. We are the country with the most Airbnb listings in the world, over 2.25 million active listings. Absolutely incredible. Now, let's talk about market demand a little more. One thing that you want to make sure you remember, there is demand there for short-term rentals, especially in high tourism markets. But what you have to remember is that some of these areas have a big need for short-term rentals because there's not a lot of hotels, or because a lot of people in business are traveling to that area. If that market changes, if the market fluctuates, if they build a lot of hotels in that area, that can create a problem for you. So I'm not a big fan of inner city VRBOs. I am a fan of destination VRBOs, specifically the beach, that has demand year round and is very consistent. Now, consistent from an income perspective, not consistent from a value perspective, because those markets tend to be more volatile in terms of value changes. Now, if you're willing to give a lion's share of your revenue to Airbnb and VRBO, marketing your short-term rental can be an easy task, and you want to make sure you're using both of them. Programs called channel managers can also be used to get data from these popular booking sites and aggregate them into one single calendar for easy maintenance. Now, for direct bookings that allow you to keep more of your earnings, you're going to want to use probably your own website or one provided by your channel manager, because you are also paying fees to Airbnb and VRBO for booking. Now, the other benefits here are community engagement, portfolio diversification, as I mentioned earlier, and tax benefits. And so there's a lot of ways that short-term rentals can help you on your investment journey. But one thing to keep in mind, with all these benefits, you're only going to get back as much as you put in. So you might notice as we've started going over the risk considerations we have on the flip side of these similar topics. So let's talk about the bad of short-term rentals. We're going to split this section into risks and considerations into two separate parts, the upfront considerations and the ongoing risks and considerations. So let's talk about the things first that you're going to want to think about before you ever get close to making a purchase. The high initial cost is probably the most obvious consideration, that when you're buying a large home in a high demand area, it's probably going to cost a lot of money. There used to be these things called second home loans, which still exist, but there was a lot of fraud going on where people were buying short-term rental investment properties as second home loans. And so the ease of getting into one of these with 10% down has changed. So for someone who is trying to get a investment property with 10% down, a short-term rental was the easiest way to do that. So it's just something that we have to keep in mind. And we go back to these three examples that we gave earlier. These properties are not cheap, and most short-term rentals are not cheap. And so the entry price, just on a sheer 20% down basis with closing costs, is a lot higher than many, many regular single-family traditional rental investment properties. So the keen investor knows there's always deals to find, and sometimes staying away from the upper echelon of tourism can help. The sticker price is just the start of what you're going to be spending. After that, you're going to have to renovate and repair, get up to code, and furnish the home. For example, I bought a new house on the beach just a few weeks ago, and I spent almost $50,000 just in furnishings and linens and dishes, and I didn't even buy the expensive stuff. I bought stuff that looks expensive, but I bargain shopped it online and through wholesale contacts that I have. So it can be very expensive to get a VRBO or short-term rental up and running. So you're going to have high quality listing photos. You're going to need software to manage the property, and of course insurance. And generally in these areas that are popular for VRBO and short-term rentals, they're higher storm risks such as the beach. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind as well, or in the mountains where you can have torrential snow, freezing, etc. So if you're purchasing a property somewhere that you don't live, you'll likely want to pay for your own travel accommodations and take time off work to go visit it and get it set up. Now, unfortunately, the spending doesn't really stop there once your short-term rental is operational. You're going to expect to pay bills for utilities, insurance, and cleaning on a monthly basis. Of course, replacement of linens and goods within the home as well for normal wear and tear, and I would call it heightened wear and tear because, again, you have constant turnover of tenants and people pack numbers of people into these houses. So instead of you maybe having 5 people living in your home, you might have 20 people sleeping there on every single stay. And then, of course, large chunks of your money are also going towards listing it on Airbnb, VRBO, etc., about 15% of each booking, and property management if you hire a property manager, which can be 18 to 20% plus of rental income. And then often they're going to charge you the specific linens type that they want. They're going to restrict when you can stay there, how many times you can stay there. So if you're going to use a property manager, you need to go through that contract with an iron tooth comb. Now, this isn't even counting the money that you're spending on the mortgage or maintenance and repairs. Of course, all properties are going to have some fees associated, but we do want you to be well aware of these high costs, not only for upfront ownership, but ongoing as well. There's also seasonal fluctuations. This is a big negative, but unlike normal rentals, once you have everything up and running, the cash flow isn't necessarily consistent. On my rentals, I make about 50% of my income just in the 3 months of summer. Now, when you're evaluating your expected income, you're going to need to look at peak versus off-peak income, local events that happen, as I mentioned, the percent of time you're going to use it personally, and potential weather considerations. For a spreadsheet-focused mind like me, this can throw a big wrench into plans since a lot more factors are up in the air, and I'm sure you already have figured out, and you know I have a massive spreadsheet to track all of this and give me the potential of what I can make on these. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't made spreadsheets to master that too. So turn into our spreadsheet savvy on July 8th, and I'm going to talk more about building your maintenance spreadsheets to manage and oversee your investments. Now, seasonal fluctuations are something that are a consideration when you're picking your short-term rental. So do you want somewhere that's going to make you consistent year-round income, great income during peak season, or massive income for a single event? I obviously love places that have huge peak income and then what we call snowbird income the rest of the year where people come for longer periods. It's hard to stand out in a market that's saturated with listings, especially if your short-term rentals in a market that's a prime tourist destination. I like to look for markets where there's a need and there's a shortage. So for example, one of the islands that I buy property on only has a few streets on the whole island, and all of the properties have water view because one side is the bay, one side is the ocean. So I know that that's geographically limited how many homes can be built in that area, and it's extremely popular. So I know that I'm controlling my own supply and demand. There was a recent made infographic that shows what US cities have the highest number of Airbnbs per thousand people who live there. And you can see Hawaii, New Orleans, Austin, Nashville. These are all the areas we're talking about here. Now, what's interesting is these are not what I would consider the highest destination travel locations for the most consistency and ease, as well as the kind of lack of a bubble risk. And so Hawaii obviously is very expensive. Austin's very expensive. New Orleans is very storm driven and has a lot of issues going on with its crime rates. And so I could dive into a lot of these, but the bottom line is that the areas where people are doing the most are not the ones that I would recommend. Now, to stay competitive, what you can expect is to spend more money on amenities, potential price wars with competitors, and huge emphasis on user reviews. This is where it's really important that you get 5 stars every single time. Now, we're going to move on to the second part of the section. We're going to talk about the risks that are harder to analyze or predict before your short-term rental is up and running. By far, the thing that's going to be the most trouble in terms of potential risks are going to be regulations at a local level and a state level. There's a huge movement against short-term rentals by people who live in the areas where they operate, and more cities are passing laws that restrict things like the number allowed, how often they can be rented out, how long people can stay, and if you can operate at all. The following markets are just some of those that have restricted short-term rentals in the last 3 years, and you'll notice there's a lot of big players on this list of places that you would consider a top short-term rental market. Now, if you didn't see your preferred market on there, that doesn't mean you're safe either. You could buy, repair, and furnish a new short-term rental one day, and restrictions could go into effect the very next day. And when you buy these properties, the value is often dictated by the income that they bring, and if that income suddenly disappears, your value could potentially tank. This is another reason why it's so important to keep up with the news of the markets that you're invested in through news sources, community engagement, and voting. You might be asking yourself why short-term rentals are the victim of so much restriction. There's 3 words that can answer that. Neighbors hate them. Really, they truly do. Here's just a few of the comments we sourced online. As someone who lives in Florida by the beach and has a neighbor who does Airbnb, I hope they are banned worldwide. They've made it hard for people to own, and they've ruined neighborhoods. TAE is a different type of party. Strangers, too many, too large, too loud, too rowdy, too destructive. Oh, no. These are the types of comments that we see and we hear from those who live around short-term rentals. And the more of a party area, like Panama City Beach is a great example, the more you might have a neighbor who complains. Now, as far as the reasons why most neighbors dislike them, the 3 primary reasons are parties, parking, and potential crime. And even for the good short-term rental owner who has rules preventing these things and good monitoring methods, the entire industry has been marred by bad examples, and HOAs are ripe and trying to shut these down as much as possible. Now, some of your best practices for addressing this include screening guests. This is a great way to have a conversation with them. Make sure that you have a minimum age for check-in. Make sure that you're talking to them about what they're using the property for. Getting to know your neighbors so you can have an open dialogue and try to stave off any higher level complaints. And of course, investing in noise management and rules and regulation monitoring technology like cameras on your patios and on your exterior. Now, if you're interested in learning more about screening in both short terms and regular rentals, register for our Screen Smart, and that's going to be August 14th, going into mastering tenant selection in your single family rentals. Now, neighbor complaints even can happen to the most diligent owners, and you can see serious issues because of one neighbor who's willing to compromise. I had a property one time where the 2 neighbors got into a fight and one threw the other one into a fence. So my tenant and the neighbor got in this massive fight. The police got called. It was a whole thing. And this was just a regular rental, speaking of which, in Panama City Beach. This is why it's important to make sure you read reviews of your guests that are staying in your short-term rentals and follow up. 94% of people reading reviews are also going to read for an owner's follow-up comments, and 48% of the people who see someone respond to a review are more likely to visit that business. So this is a positive both for you, making sure you're monitoring your own reviews of potential issues, but also looking at the reviews of the guests that are coming to stay at your property. You might also find false reviews, usually by dissatisfied guests who got in trouble or weren't happy with the amount that they paid or other factors. Maybe they got in trouble for bringing a dog into the property, those types of things. Another common pitfall for owners is not being properly prepared for bad guests. No matter what precautions you take, you will likely run into some irresponsible guests. Those actions include leaving the house trashed, damaging or stealing items, or just being too loud. You can minimize, though, by laying out clear house rules and establishing things like cleaning fees, damage charges, or denial of future service. But either way, you should expect that there will be severe wear and tear on these homes quicker than a rental where someone is living there full time. Now, it also helps to have a group of contractors or handymen you know and trust to make the repairs you need quickly and assess the property. Your cleaner is going to be your most important member of your team because they're going to be the ones checking for damages, missing items, and make sure that you get those 5-star reviews. So note that this is especially important if you're not living in a city or state where you're renting out that short-term rental. So this gets back into the time commitment, which is one of the most common complaints we hear about short-term rentals if you're going to do them successfully. They're just so much work because if you don't have a property manager, you're the one on call from every guest for every issue and every question. So just to get the short-term rental off the ground, expect to be putting in hundreds of hours of work, even if you feel like the property you bought was in good condition. And then to make sure you stay competitive, you're going to need to be very quick on answering about bookings and inquiries. Once the guests are inside the short-term rental, you're expected to be on call 24/7. Now, the time commitment can vary whether you live close to the short-term rental or states away. But whether you're driving out to the property or calling people who live there, that is a big time commitment. That's why we always recommend you have a property manager, even in these cases where it's so expensive. But you have to keep in mind that if you have a property manager, it's unlikely you're going to make a big profit. So you're likely thinking, well, this is what property managers are for, right? This isn't to say you shouldn't get one. You likely will need one. Here's the considerations we recommend you ask yourself. How much time do I have available to spend on this short-term rental? How close am I to this short-term rental? And do I have the connections necessary to handle problems that come up? You want to make sure you have expanded insurance coverage to cover the short-term rental because it's a different type of insurance, how to handle low occupancy periods, and of course, privacy concerns. Now, that may have seemed like a lot of risks to go over, but I cannot stress enough what about undertaking a short-term rental truly is. Last, we're going to go over the ugly. That's the process and hard work you'll have to put in to get your short-term rental up and going. Market research, property selection, preparing the property, listing and marketing, managing the rental, and maximizing success. Let's go in depth. First things first, the million-dollar question summed up in one word is, where are you going to buy that property? Market research means that you're going to be looking into the following for every market you consider, just like we recommend on traditional short-term rentals: economic trends, regulatory history, and funding availability. Second home loans, as I mentioned earlier, have recently become plagued by mortgage fraud. And so what happened is they modified short-term loans, these second home loans, and now they are 20% down, typically minimum. So you want to make sure that when you're doing your research for these mortgages, you don't try to go online and find a bunch of people that are offering these crazy programs that don't really exist, because you can fall victim to fraud, and you need to expect that you're going to put at least 20% down. When you're researching, make sure to remember that certain neighborhoods may have lower kind of the requirements of short-term rentals or no rules at all. And then some neighborhoods might have really heavy rules where you can't short-term rental it at all, or they're going to have a month minimum or a week minimum. And I always recommend doing in any time period for short-term rental. So I might have a guest stay 2 nights or 4 nights or 7 nights. If you have a neighborhood that requires a minimum of 14 days or 21 days, stay away. You're not going to make good money that way. So places like New Orleans, the Vegas Strip, many beaches have extra restrictions that you may not have realized. Once you've determined the markets, then you can start to look for the specific property that you want. You want to make sure that you consider the proximity to whatever location or hub or landmarks or places you're trying to attract people to. So locations within 1 mile of that location or those amenities earn up to 300% more than those that are 5 miles away. And that's a huge statistic. So this is why if you're really, really inland and really far away from the stuff, I don't recommend doing a short-term rental. You want to make sure you investigate the occupancy rate of nearby short-term rentals on Airbnb and VRBO. This is like the first market research I do when I'm considering a property or a location. If you're in no hurry, it's good to be able to see the rates in peak and off-peak season. Now, you want to make sure you know what purpose your short-term rental is going to serve, and make sure you get a size that is according to that. So if it's going to be a big party area, you need to sleep more people, whereas if it's going to be a serene couples type area, then you maybe don't need as many beds. So keep that in mind. Now, depending on the size of the property, you're going to need to figure out the parking situation, because that's the number 2 neighbor complaint after noise for short-term rentals. Several of the rules that we use for traditional rentals can also come in handy here too. Now, proximity to major highways is a great thing to consider with property selection. How easy is it to get to the closest airport? Is it near Walmart and gas stations? Low crime rate areas. After you've selected and determined funding, you want to make sure you get ready for a lot of additional work that is still yet to come. When we're preparing the property, that's going to include doing the upfront necessary repairs and renovations, and then furnishing and amenities that you're going to need. While doing both of these, remember the number 1 rule: you don't live there, at least not most of the time, and that means don't overdo it. You want furniture that's going to last, because you can't trust that your guests will take the care the same way they would in their own homes. So what do you overdo? Safety features. Cameras, smoke detectors, regular inspections with, again, your cleaner's going to be your best friend here. That's what's going to be what saves you money. So while you're preparing, make sure you get photos of the property at its absolute best. You're going to need those for the marketing sites Airbnb and VRBO. They have very strict requirements on what type of photos in terms of the format and also the size that they want. Now, those are going to kind of share out to marketing channels like Travelocity and Expedia and all of those. Now, when you use a channel manager, that's also going to be something that you're going to want to set up. If you're going to do a lot of bookings, and I do recommend you use VRBO and Airbnb for your best success, you want to make sure that those channel managers are something that you look into. Some examples of those are Lodgify, Hostaway, or Guesty. You also want to make sure you're utilizing SEO or find a program or person who does, since you're already fighting an uphill battle in terms of competition, especially in the inner cities. So when you write your descriptions, you can be very selective about how you write them so that the marketing areas in these channels will pick them up to the best of their ability. So now, once we get to managing the rental, this is where you're going to make the big decision. Do you get a property manager or do you not get a property manager? The advantages are, of course, peace of mind, a lower time commitment, marketing's done for you, and you don't have to handle the repairs yourself from a coordination and organization standpoint. But the disadvantages, specifically in short-term rentals, are an extremely high cost. Regardless of whether you have a property manager or not, the number one skill you need to develop to be able to effectively manage a short-term rental is communication. Guest communication is either going to be your number one selling point or the reason you get bad reviews. In addition to communication and bookings, you need to focus on establishing your cleaning schedule and your regular maintenance schedule. There are some good strategies you can employ to keep your short-term rental running well. You want to make sure you learn from your setbacks, turn what used to be obstacles into advantages, and use mistakes as stepping stones. Short-term rentals are a rapidly evolving medium, so make sure you're keeping up with news and recent trends to maximize your success. Your reviewers are your built-in to-do list. You must monitor your feedback. Respect their feedback, good and bad, and make changes unless, of course, they're fake reviews. And make sure you stay positive. The number one great positive with short-term rentals, even when business struggles, you always have a great place to stay. This is the one I just bought. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I encourage you to join our free Wealth and Rentals Facebook group, 24/7 Investor Talk, updated news on the North Texas and nationwide markets, access to me and other experts for free asking questions. You can join that today. And of course, I highly encourage you, if you're kind of stuck in your real estate investment journey, you don't know what your next steps are, schedule a consult call with me. We do 30 minutes plus a bunch of intake information in the front end that I do. So it's a total of about an hour value for only $175. I think people have a lot of great success with these, and I'd love to be able to chat with you to help you decide what your next steps should be. And if you still have questions, you can contact us, info@slaughterinvesting.com, or on the website or by phone. Thanks so much for watching.